Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
Welcome back. This is Dan and Bill. We are here asking some more questions. Today, we're going to get into something that happened to Bill the other day. So why don't you just tell me, what happened to you?
So about 2 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago, um, on Friday, I got a call from my dad saying my mom was acting a little weird, and she was having some problems with her memory, like she was having trouble remembering stuff. And then about 2 hours later, he called and he said, "I need your help. I need you to come over. I can't get your mom. I can't get your mom to do anything or answer anything or do what the doctor said because she was having problems with her memory. And they had called their regular doctor, and the doctor had said she needs to go into the ER and get checked out. Right.
Seems like a good
So,
idea.
yeah. But my mom wouldn't agree to do it. And I didn't understand because that doesn't make sense. My mom is a reasonable person. If there's something wrong and her doctor has told her to go to the emergency room at any point in her life, she's gone to the emergency room. She's never argued with her doctor. So I went over and got over to my parents' house, and I got there, and my mom was moving around. She said she felt nauseous. She kept sitting down, but she could get up, she could move, she could look at you, she could talk to you, but you could tell something was off. When you looked at her, she just didn't look normal. Something was going on. And I asked, like, she's like, "Why are you here?" And started asking a lot of like really like what's going on. And I asked just some like basic questions. And my dad started with she doesn't know she doesn't know what year it is. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know what's happening. And I said, and so I just started asking some simple questions. I was like, well, Mom, your doctor said you need to go to the emergency room. And she said, no, no, I don't. Why? This is stupid. Why are y'all here? Why are you acting this way? And I started with some really basic questions like, well, do you remember me? She's like, yeah, you're Bill, you're my son. I was like, okay. Do you remember Tanner? She's like, yeah, Tanner is my son. I was like, do you remember that Tanner's getting married in 2 weeks? She goes, Tanner's not getting married. Tanner's not even dating anybody. And my brother's been with his fiance for like 2.5 years now. I said, do you remember Brandon was sick? Because my son had been sick. And she goes, no, what are you talking about? I said, do you remember when you got married? And she threw out a random year that was wrong. Do you know who the president is? And she's like, well, the president. I was like, well, but who is it? The president. Why are you asking stupid questions? And she started kind of laughing at everything. This is silly. And it went back and forth for like 10 or 15 minutes. And and we would like mention something, and within a minute or two, she wouldn't remember what was going on. It's
So
like, we need to
no
get
short
you
term.
zero short term. We need to get you in the car. Why are we going to the car? You're going to the emergency room. Why am I going to the emergency room? Right? Um, you know, and this took like 15 or 20 minutes, and it was very disturbing because I mean, you see this kind of stuff in the movies, right, or TV, and you think it's not real. In fact, once we finally got her in the car and got her headed toward the hospital, because memory loss can be caused by a lot of things. You know, in my life, I have known fairly well at least two people who had epilepsy due to some kind of traumatic brain injury. One of them was injured when they were young. One of them was in a car wreck in high school, and both of them after that would have seizures and then go through a period of short-term memory loss where it almost was like their brain would reboot and it would take a little while before things came back. But this was not that. There was no evidence of a seizure. There was no evidence that of someone coming out of a seizure. There was nothing like that. And so my dad got her to the hospital, And it was about 4 or 5 hours later, he called and he said, "Well, the doctors have a diagnosis." And I said, "Okay, what's that?" He said, "It's transient global amnesia." I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "They don't know why it happens, but you lose your memory and it should come back within 24 to 48 hours. And there's several potential causes, but they don't really know why it happens."
And so when you called me about this the next morning and
Actually,
told me that this is,
it was about a half hour after I got off the phone with my dad when I called you.
it may have been. I
Yeah,
realized that was Thanksgiving weekend, or that was spring break weekend. And I don't know what day it was now that you say that. So,
it was
but
Friday.
you called me and told me, and my immediate response was, "Well, that sounds like they don't know what it is, and they just made something up."
Yeah,
But
actually,
you looked into
your
it.
exact words were, "That's bull." You know what?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
or sounds like bull. Yeah, bull crap. You were a little more flavorful, but and then you did what you always do, and you immediately typed it into the internet and looked it up,
Yeah.
and you went, "Oh my God, this is a thing," right? And just so everybody knows, my mom's fine. Everything's okay. But this was one of the most single, like, terrifying incidents I've ever lived through because it came out of nowhere. Because what had happened was they were getting ready to go do something. And so she got up. They had taken a like kind of lazy morning and she had gone back to get a shower and get changed. And within 10 minutes went from fine to this. And it just came out of nowhere. And it was the non-responsiveness and the inability to get her to move in a particular direction because as soon as she got in the car and they were pulling out of the driveway and she couldn't see me and my youngest son, she didn't know we were there. Like, she didn't know we were at the house. In fact, as they're backing out, she asked my dad, she's like, "Why is Bill's car here?" She had forgotten between
She
backing
didn't.
out of the driveway and between shutting the door to the garage, getting in the car, and backing out, that I wasn't in her physical vision, that I was there. So in less than
Yep.
90 seconds, her entire memory that I existed in the house that day was gone. And that was very, honestly, very frightening, especially for someone that you've known your whole life and they've never had any cognitive issues and everything's going on. And so I've kind of
And
gone down this rabbit hole of what is this? Where does it come
and
from?
in looking into it, we've done a little poking at this point, and the things that cause it is everything from like a really hot or really cold shower, or a bump on the head, or being up, stressed and overworked and upset. I mean, it's just sort of like it's all over the
Migraine,
field. Yeah.
high cholesterol, intercourse, heart disease. It's just like all over the
I
place.
think intercourse gets lumped in there. It is strenuous physical activity is one of
Activity,
the other
yeah.
ones. So
But they
I think it's
specifically called that one out at the Mayo Clinic as one of the triggers. So that's
probably
the
because this only happens, and I'm speculating here. Obviously, I don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But if it only happens in older and middle-aged people, then one of the few strenuous activities that those people probably do is
yeah, it
intercourse.
would be that,
But
yeah.
and you would need to call it out specifically because it's probably not something that they would bring up voluntarily, of like,
Yes.
oh well, we were doing that this morning before this happened, because who puts those
Yeah, it's
together
it's
and thinks,
probably on
you
the
know,
questionnaire that's asked.
yeah,
And to define this for those out there, again, transient global amnesia. And I'm speaking from Cleveland Clinic's website because the Mayo Clinic had some really good stuff. The Cleveland Clinic has had the most comprehensive information I've been able to find. Generally affects people 50 and older, right? And it affects between 23 and 32 people per 100,000 per year. And that's the information we know because one of the requirements to be diagnosed with this is someone else has to see it happen and get you into the hospital for a diagnosis because the person can't bring it out. And to be honest, my mom was in the hospital for a day and a half and ran through a massive battery of tests because there's other things that can cause this. She did an MRI, she did a CT scan, they did several ultrasounds, they did blood work, and in fact, because of
Did they
this,
did they
she's
do
been
any
diagnosed.
cognitive
Yes,
tests?
there were cognitive tests
Okay.
throughout the whole thing, and a lot of stroke tests, like cognitive
Hmm.
tests around stroke. Um, because that's another thing that can cause memory loss, right? But she didn't have any of the. My grandfather had a stroke. Actually, both of my grandfathers have had strokes, so I've seen stroke victims before. And generally, there's like slackness in the face and like arm pain and things that go along with that. None of that was present. None of the smells or physical sensations that go along with stroke were present in any way, shape, or form. If there was any kind of facial slackness, it was the whole face, and it was more like someone who was just confused, right? As opposed to like you see with a stroke victim, traditionally, not always, but traditionally. Um, and she was diagnosed with two minor aneurysms that they said could have been there from birth, which she now knows that are there and will be getting checked on. So that was, we would never have known about those. Um, otherwise. But after about a day, her memory started to come back. In fact, later that day, her memory started to come back. So at around the 12 to 15 hour mark, her memory began to come back. And within 36 hours, it was fully back. Um, and then she got discharged from the hospital and came home. But basically, this thing boils down to your brain reboots, and they have no clue why. I
And
mean,
I have a feeling this is probably an example of like three or four different things that all have very similar effects, and then we don't know what they are yet.
yeah.
It's probably a lump thing of just like we're working on it. We'll figure out what this is at
So
some point.
reading from the Cleveland Clinic website, even though researchers have been studying transient global amnesia for over 50 years, they're
Wow.
still not sure what causes it or why it happens. You know,
Well, we understand so absolutely nothing about the brain. Like it's the wildest. I I was reading something the other day about how the people who were having seizures. One of the old solutions was to like cut the two halves of your brain in half and
yeah,
separate them from each other because one side would have the seizure and the other side wouldn't, and you'd be okay. And it was like, and then that changes all your perceptions get weird, and you can
it causes all
hold
kinds of
something in one
problems.
hand
Yeah.
and see it in your right eye. It's weird, but like we don't really understand how this thing that we think runs everything actually works.
So I'm going to read for everybody who may be listening, or who hopefully is listening, what the summation is. It's like, what is this? What is TGA or transient global amnesia? Transient global amnesia is a rare medical condition in which you experience a sudden episode of memory loss. During a TGA episode, you cannot form new memories, a condition called antegrade amnesia, and you have difficulty recalling recent memories, a condition called retrograde amnesia. Transient means passing, so transient global amnesia episodes usually last no more than several hours. In rare cases, they last up to 24 hours. People with TGA remember who they are, can remember their family and their friends. They can still perform complex daily tasks such as cooking or driving. They also retain their language and social interaction skills. However, during a TGA episode, they may not know where they are or the day or the time. And in fact, my mom she's retired, but she refs volleyball, and she knew a tournament was coming up because it was the weekend, and she wanted to go to the tournament. And I asked her the rules, and she spit them all out. So she probably could have refed a game, but she may not have been able to
Hmm.
remember the score. I mean, but
That
that's that like she could call it in the moment, like you could cook or you could drive. And
yeah.
from what I've read, people can drive, but they don't know where they're going.
Well,
And
we
that's the
all
problem
do
I run
that.
into.
How often do you go somewhere? You're driving to go somewhere and you end up at work or home and
Yes,
you're like, "Wait a minute, I was going to the grocery store before," but you just sort of slip into some
autopilot.
and you just end up where you normally go. You know, your body essentially just takes over at that point.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I was telling you the other day, I think I did. I was we were my wife and I were driving into Houston and we had there was music on the radio and I was reading a book on my Kindle and I realized that I was reading the words on the pages and processing them and I was also singing all the words to the song that were on the radio. And I
Hmm.
was doing both of them at the same time and I honestly had a moment of, "Oh, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that I could actually run these two different programs at the same
At the same
time
time.
and
Yeah.
be able to actually understand it." And I think it also had to do with it was Johnny Cash and it was Walk the Line, and I know the words to that.
Well, certain things get imprinted in your brain,
Yes,
right? There's certain songs, certain sounds, certain smells. Um, this has just
which
been a fascinating rabbit hole for me to run down because they don't know anything. They don't. And I have a feeling that this is a greatly underreported problem because
uh,
somebody else has to be there. The episodes can last so little time and you don't remember it happened. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody that's like, I just felt like I lost the day?
where did the weekends go?
Yeah.
You get off work Friday afternoon, you bump your head, you trip on the stairs and bump your head on the front door on your way into the house. You go to sleep. You wake up. It's Monday morning, and you're late for work because you think it's Saturday. But like
Yeah.
you know,
So if anybody's out there and they're worried, is somebody having this? Let's just go through a couple of the symptoms so you can be aware of it. And again, extremely rare. People will appear disoriented and confused, and that can be caused by so many things. But they tend to repeatedly ask the same question, especially about the date, the time, the location, and what's going on. Like they just can't wrap their head around where am I, what's going on, what's happening.
I'm gonna sidebar you on that. This is interesting. When I was a kid and I got in my car accident. I hit my head. It's interesting though. The when the EMTs went through the list of questions and asked me, to make sure I was, what's your
Yeah,
name and when is it and all that kind of stuff. I was 10. It was the summer, and they asked me what day it was. And my response, if I remember it correct, was like, "It's the summer. I don't even know. I
yeah.
don't have to know what day it is." But for the rest of that evening until I ended up going into surgery and it being a different day, I kept asking. I couldn't retain it
Hmm.
even though I wanted to. So I kept going like, "I've forgotten again what day it is. And I need you to tell me again." And then it'd be 5 minutes later I'd ask again. So that may be a something that our mind grabs onto, and when it's not there, it's nagging. That we
And
need to know what it is.
and on that, the antegrade amnesia, the inability to form new memories, can be caused
Mm-hmm.
by other things. It's not just this, but this is
Mm-hmm.
like the all of a sudden I have no memory out of the movies, and I never thought it was a real thing. Um, some things that it's not this. People don't lose consciousness with it. They don't tend to have any other neurological or cognitive systems like language problems or issues moving. Um, you don't tend to wake up with it either. It almost always happens later in the day, which is
Hmm.
interesting. But some other things, and again, this can be caused by so many things. Other symptoms you can have: headache, nausea and vomiting, dizziness, anxiety. Um, so,
Sounds like a Tuesday.
yeah. Um, but, you know, it was scary because you didn't know what was going on and you couldn't get the person to do the basic thing they needed to do to take care of themselves because again, my mom's older, her family has a history of stroke. Want to make sure that's not what it is. We didn't know if she had fallen down and hit her head in the back, and they didn't tell anybody. We didn't know, and we couldn't get her to do and comply. Because my dad had been trying for several hours to get her to get in the car and go, you know,
Hmm.
go to the hospital. And he would even show her the text. See, like the doctor said to go to the hospital. Let's go. And she's like, "Why are we going to the car?" A minute later, it's
Yeah.
because it's just not clicking. You know. Um,
It's interesting when you called me and told me about this. I went back in and told Leslie and everybody what was going on because that's what we do. And
yeah.
her first response was, "Well, that's the third mom." And I went, "Sorry, what?" And she's like, "All of your friends' moms are all having neurological issues." And it was sort of that moment of like, "Oh, that's interesting." All of these people who were actually no, I think she's four. Yeah, so it's and they all lived in Houston at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a little weird too.
Although this has
But
happened to people across the country, so
I understand. But no, but just it's interesting to see as we're as we're getting people are getting older in a more modern age. It seems like we're seeing more of this stuff, and it's you start wondering about what are the plastics and the pesticides and all the things that we eat and use and
well, and to take a
with.
hard right turn on that, you and I both grew up in Houston, and
Hmm.
I've recently been having some health issues with like allergies and a really bad cold. And as a child, I kept getting diagnosed with chronic bronchitis. And I was talking to my current physician, and she's like, "Yeah, chronic bronchitis is something they used to say in the 80s for people who were borderline asthmatic but didn't need an inhaler." And when I moved out of Houston, most of that went away. But since I had COVID a couple of years ago, and I had a mildly long case of the Omicron variant, I think.
I think you had. Here's how I would describe what you had, because I had it too. Oh, let's just cover this real quick. When I got COVID, I was sick 2 weeks. At the middle of my 2 week period, I went and got monoclonal and immediately started an uptick and felt better.
Yeah,
When you got it, you had it pretty quick and done, and then you just had this long coast of just like utter
couldn't
terribleness for
breathe.
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you didn't
I
get
was
the flu
sick.
shit that I got. You
No,
got
I didn't.
something.
I never got
Yeah,
as sick as you got, but I got sick for about 7 days. Bad.
yeah,
And then it took 6 weeks before I could breathe enough to go back to
yeah.
work. And we talk for a living. And it took almost a year for me to get my wind back. And now it's been about a year since then. I caught this cold, and the allergies in Central Texas, where we are at right now, are off the charts. I mean, it's a 12 and a half point scale, and it's been floating at like 10.7, 10.8, 11. So that's bad. And I've had this really bad chest cold, but I have just been having problems catching my breath to the point I'm on an inhaler now, which I haven't been on an inhaler except like once or twice in my whole life. And I think that between growing up with all the smog and nastiness in Houston, and living in a smoking household because my dad was a smoker. I lived with a smoker in college for most of my college career, and now this. I think my lungs are hurt. I think I'm having a lot more trouble getting over a chest cold than I should, and it's impacting me significantly. This is the third year now I haven't been able to go out and hike in spring, and that's something I do. I like to get outside in spring. And so I'm gonna do some stuff I probably should have done a while back. I'm gonna go see an allergist. I'm gonna see about getting on the shots and that kind of stuff. But these where you live is an impact, right? And for
Yeah.
those who don't know it, in the 80s and the 90s, Houston and Los Angeles would vie day in and day out for the worst air pollution in the country, and it was horrible.
Well, and I was recalling the other day. I don't remember it much as I got older, but I remember because I haven't they don't. I don't think they do this anymore. I remember when the trucks used to drive down the street and spray all the mosquito poison everywhere.
Yeah,
Like we
the
didn't
fogging
go out and
trucks.
run. We didn't run out and play in it. Like I know that there were some people that did that, but it was like I remember you coming down the street and you
And
look out
just
the
like the
window
wall
and
of fog, yeah.
a wall. And they
The
just
funny
kill.
thing is, when my mom was pregnant with me, my dad had a lawn business and a fogging business, and they drove that fogging truck. And for those who don't know it, they sat outside the fogging truck in an open cab spraying that stuff, and they didn't wear any kind of respiratory protection. They just did it. So that may explain some stuff with me. But yeah, I mean,
Explains a lot more than you think.
but yeah, Houston would like just a wall. Imagine a wall of fog of poison to kill the mosquitoes.
But it's only poisonous to the mosquitoes, I'm sure.
Sure, I'm sure. Just like, all of that World War One war crime chemical weapon stuff is all actually insect toxin. That's where mustard gas and all that stuff comes from. Is the Germans invented a pesticide, and then they concentrated it, and everybody, I'm not just blaming the Germans here, during World War One, everybody bombed everybody with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're so nice to each other.
Yeah.
It's real encouraging.
We can talk about history and war and all that stuff in another episode, but there's a lot of unintended consequences. And it wasn't that long ago, because we're recording this on March 25th, that these poor people in Ohio had to deal with like a monster chemical bomb going off, and
Well,
it
people
looks
people
like there was a train wreck, and it was a big chemical train wreck a few weeks ago, and they came in and they just blew it up because it was all toxic chemicals. And then the government came in and said, "Oh, everything's fine." And apparently, some people out of A&M went and tested and went, "Nope, nope, there's a bunch of bad stuff in the air. This is not good." So
they were testing the water. Actually, the A&M guys
that's right,
were.
it was the water.
Yeah, it was the water. I don't actually know if anybody has been testing the air. That's a really good
There
question.
are air tests going on. I don't know. It's been hard to find information on.
Well, I think the most important thing that happened during that Ohio thing, and I'm going to take a hard left on this, is what happened to the UFOs that they
Oh yeah, I
shot
know.
down. I
Yeah.
mean, that's
Well,
I did. Well, we'll just leave that question there, and we can come back to it. But like,
yeah, we'll
it
leave that
felt
there.
like he shot down a couple
So,
UFOs, and then
and
just because no
just to
one was paying
clarify for
attention.
everyone, there was a Chinese spy balloon. We shot that down. Then there were
Yes.
some UFOs that we shot down with the F-22s. We're not just making this stuff up. It actually happened,
No, no.
right?
So
So the Chinese spy balloon, then the UFOs got shot down, and they mysteriously lost all the evidence and couldn't find it. Then the Ohio thing blew up, but now it's okay because they're going to indict Trump, and we don't have to talk about any of this stuff in the news. And I don't care what your politics are. I'm not going to say pro, anti-Trump, whatever. It's just let's shove this stuff underneath get it out of the news cycle so nobody has to talk about it, right? That's what it
well,
feels like. That's what it feels
it's
like.
it feel here's what here's what it is, and I feel like there was a show called The Circus at some point. Maybe it was a sports show, but I don't remember now. But it's the circus. It's news happens, and then the circus comes to. It's the rodeo clown. The
Yeah,
bull rider's gonna happen, and then the moment something bad happens, the clown comes out to
to
distract everybody,
distract and
so
get the
that
focus
you
somewhere
don't pay
else.
it, so that you don't notice that the dude broke his leg, or
Yeah,
whatever, But like
yeah.
that's also it's distracting the audience and the bull. But I feel like that's what a lot of the current
News
media
cycle,
is.
new
Media,
contemporary
yeah.
media cycle is. And to bring all this back around, right? We have no idea what we've been using for the last 75 years, biochemical stuff, plastics, how this is affecting people. We don't have data, and people are living longer. So, to kind of bring it back around to what you were talking about, where's some of this stuff coming from? And Back to the amnesia thing, it is so transient in that it's rare that it lasts more than 24 hours. To study the brain, we have to have all the EEG stuff hooked up. And by the time they got to those tests on my mom in the hospital, most of her memory was back. And
Mm-hmm.
then they wanted her to sleep with the electrodes on her head for like 3 hours so they could run a test. Well, one, if you've ever tried to sleep in a hospital, it's almost impossible. And two, in that 3 hour period, 5 people came in and ran through a 40-minute cognitive test during the 3 hour test. So at no point did she actually sleep, or they got the results that they wanted to happen.
I mean that really is a problem that you run into in hospitals. I've had
Yeah,
plenty of stays in hospitals for not something like that, but physical traumatic injuries, and I mean you can't. It's sort of especially in the beginning, especially when you are still in a I don't think she was, but in a trauma, in something where they're
yeah.
actively trying to make sure that you're not
The
having
ER type rooms before you've been moved to a
right.
stabilized room.
They
Yeah.
they also don't talk to each other.
Uh-uh.
Things
They
people are
don't.
coming in and going, I got to do this thing, and I got paid to do this, so when I come down to do that, I'm going to do that thing.
In
I've
a
watched enough ER to know how. No.
in another episode, we'll talk about hospitals because I spent 10 weeks working in a hospital. And that was one of the most enlightening things. And I was part of the staff with the program that I went through, even though I wasn't a medical person. I was actually, for those who are interested, I was a chaplain, and we can talk about that later on. But
Yeah.
everything that goes around that, and all the logging of information, all that is absolutely fascinating and very hard to keep up with.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we can dive into hospitals on a whole other scale at some point, but I mean, the idea is that we're not able to see it. I don't put it back on at the beginning of COVID when we were looking at vaccines and things, and we didn't really know it, what the outcome was going to be. We've reached this point in our society where we're seeing potentially could be seeing the effects of what putting your lunch sandwich in a plastic bag every day does.
Hmm.
Like you Joe Rogan's had on Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who talks about, I'm trying to remember all the words, phthalates, which I think come from plastics, and she's been seeing how there's been changes in men and testosterone levels, and I don't know her research well enough to even talk on it, but like that's a thing that's happening, and who knows what
And
we think the plastic that was in our thermoses as a kid was safe. What
we
if
have
it
no
wasn't?
idea.
What
You,
if
you
there's
say that, and I think about how many times I've taken some kind of like spaghetti type thing with red sauce and just tossed the Tupperware, generic Tupperware, in the microwave and hit thing, and it discolors and it changes and it's permanently changed the plastic. So what did it do to the food? I've never thought about it. I just ate it anyway, right? What has that done? How much of that have I consumed? I have no idea.
yeah, yeah, so that the microwave in changing that plastic, did it release something?
We don't know.
We've always said, and I'll take it. I don't even have any. I'm speculating wildly. We use paper plates in the microwave all the time. What does the microwave do to a paper plate? Like, does it release anything? Is that wax? I'm not saying that it is, but like, does that little wax coating that's on top of that, does it change when you apply
Because
microwaves to it?
you
I don't know.
definitely know if you accidentally put a styrofoam plate in a microwave and hit
Oh, yes.
to it's just
But
or
the
one of the
let
worst things that's ever happened. My son took one of those little microwavable where you put the water in to make the mac and cheese things, and he forgot to put the water in, and
ooh,
then did the whole like 5 minute thing, and it was a meteor. It was this black charred mass, and it took weeks to get the smell out of the house.
Thank you all for joining. That's where we're going to end this episode. That same child who left the mac and cheese in the microwave needed Bill's assistance at that moment, so we went ahead and stopped it there. Hope to see you guys again next time.